enthusiastic about.
Steve Jackson's here promoting his fighting fantasy game books, which are based on the Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game, which first became popular in the United States about 10 years ago. The idea behind Steve's books is that the reader plays the role of hero, and armed with a sword, dice, pencil and rubber, the reader decides which direction to take, which dangers to risk, and which monsters to fight. The role-playing adventures have really taken off, and Steve puts their success down to a lack of adventure in the real world.
Now the whole world's been explored, you know, all you have to do is watch TV and you can see what's happening in any area of the world. So that the only sort of interesting worlds that are left are worlds of the imagination, where, you know, the geography, the history hasn't been researched, and you don't see it on TV all the time. You're entirely at the mercy of the author's imagination, and you know, the laws of physics don't apply. Geography, history, the world as we know it just doesn't exist. Anything can happen. Magic works. Monsters exist that biology wouldn't allow.
Steve and his partner Ian Livingston first got interested in games while they were schoolboys in Manchester, England, and about 10 years ago they both chucked in their jobs to make an all-out effort to get their games company off the ground. Steve says in the beginning they had some hard times.
So that time we were living in the back of the van outside the office. Coming in, we joined a squash club around the corner where we could go off and have a shower and then come in after playing squash and have a shave and things. I don't need one now. But, you know, and there was a guy in the estate agent that ran the estate agency next door, and he'd hear all these strange sounds of shavers in the morning. Didn't know quite what was going on. But it was after that that it all started to grow.
Steve now heads a multi-million-dollar company which sells games, models and fantasy books all over the world. That's the sort of success that young New Zealander Matt Taylor can only dream of. He's just invented Breakscore, a new board game which is described as a cross between Yahtzee and backgammon. Matt started work on Breakscore about 5 years ago because he thought it was time New Zealanders had a board game with a special Kiwi flavour.
Well, it's quite distinctive in the language, if you like. Boomer, Zouch, End Zone, Voids, and I guess the game, you know, it's been designed very much for the international market, but the language is something which you and I might not relate to, but kids do on the playground.
Matt said it was difficult to get any of the big games companies interested in his new idea. He was too small time and too much of a risk. So he chucked in his regular job last year and took up part-time taxi driving, and then began the job of designing the final game, producing it and selling it to department stores and toy shops. Matt said he was pretty certain the game would catch on because he'd asked a lot of his friends what they thought of Breakscore and how it could be improved.
Yeah, I went knocking on doors, you know. I found out what, you know, kids were saying on the playgrounds. You know, I went to the neighbour's place and I sent several prototypes out into schools and, you know, got the feedback from them. In fact, one of the strengths, I think, of the game is that I've been able to draw on, you know, a lot of interest and energy from people from a wide variety of backgrounds.
The first 1,000 copies have already been sold, and this week Breakscore is being officially launched at Onslow College in Wellington, which is Matt's old school. Breakscore's also received the official support of Overseas Trade Minister Mike Moore, and Matt says it looks like he's finally rolled that lucky 6 and become the new success story of the games world. This is Hannah Wallace for the Video Dispatch.
Yeah, what's different about them is that they're novels and games. The Warlock of Firetop Mountain, for example, the first one. Before you start the adventure, you have to roll up skill, stamina and luck scores with dice. And then you start, which is a 4-part series. It's one long adventure that scans over 4 different books. It works in the same way, except in this book that you have to learn magic spells before you start. At the back of every one of the adventures, there's a spell book. And the whole thing takes place in the land of Kakabad, and the first book takes you from the Cantopani Gate to Kare, then the next one's through Kare, which is this one. The second one's across the backlands, and the fourth one... it's a fierce jungle out there, and there are very few gems that shine through. They are